It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome to episode 88 of the Lekker Rugby Pod. Harry Jones and I are joined today by Tinus van Staden. Today I'm going to do the intro, and before we say welcome, I'm going to read it because I'm quite proud of what we wrote here. There's an unspoken rule in South African rugby. If it's in Rapport, it must be true. Not rumor, not speculation, just cold printed certainty. The kind that makes union bosses squirm and WhatsApp groups catch fire. We all know about that. And at the center of it all is a name that carries weight, typically Hendrik Cronjé. When he writes it, people read it, and when he reports it, they react. But behind every deadline and every inside source, there's an editor. The man who decides what runs, what doesn't, and when the storm is worth it. That man is Tinus van Staden. It's our pleasure today to welcome Tinus van Staden, editor, sports editor of Rapport, the venerable Rapport. And today we're going to find out what it's like being an editor of a big newspaper like Rapport. Welcome, Tinus.
Hi, Emvia. Thanks so much. Hi, Harry. I mean, that's such a nice intro. I think I'll come on once a week on your pod, and then you can just talk about me and Rapport. I think that'll be nice.
How's it, Tinus? I was thinking, Emvia, the corollary of that is, and if it's not yet in the report, then it's not true yet. There's so many times we're like, oh, it could be true, but I'm going to wait for Hendrik to confirm it, which means Tinus must have greenlighted it.
That's exactly true. Now, I want to find out if anybody asks me anything, I'll check with Hendrik or I'll check with Tinus. Then we know something's up there. But today we want to talk about, like I said, we're going to talk about Rapport a little bit. And like I said, the rugby in Rapport is gospel. You're his editor. Now, I know Hendrik is a very nice guy, but he's very driven, he's very connected, and he always comes up with these stories and everything else. What's your dynamic with a guy like Hendrik? How do you manage that?
It's an interesting story with myself and Hendrik. My dad was at Volksblad. He was a journalist at Volksblad, assistant editor there for many years. And when we got to Bloemfontein, Hendrik was the sports editor at Volksblad, and I was in grade 9 in Hoërskool Centraal. So I used to go to Volksblad and shadow with guys like Hendrik and Johan Tormalen, who's also at Rapport now, and Johan de Jager, who's still there at Volksblad and Netwerk 24. So yeah, when I started out, Hendrik was sports editor at Volksblad. I was a student who he asked me to do club rugby and schools rugby. So that's how it started. That's how I got to know Hendrik Cronjé. And then obviously after I studied, I started working at Volksblad. And at that stage, Hendrik went to Rapport. That was 2015, just after the Rugby World Cup. And then, long story short, I moved to Johannesburg and I started to work at Beeld and Netwerk 24, started to freelance at Rapport as well. So Hendrik and I, we have a very good relationship. I have a lot of respect for him. And we have a fantastic working relationship that stretches back years. And it's not uncomfortable at all because we have mutual respect for each other. So it's a very good and comfortable relationship between Hendrik and myself. Just listening to Hendrik sometimes, because he knows there's so many things that he knows that you can't necessarily print. So just to have a conversation with Hendrik is just it's fantastic. But we work together as a team very, very well, I believe.
I want to ask you a funny question, because when I was younger and I had to manage a person that was older than me, in South Africa there's this tradition: if someone's 10 years older than you roughly, you call him oom. But the moment you call someone who works for you oom, it makes it very difficult to manage him. Did you ever have that problem with Hendrik, or was the age gap not that big?
The age gap is quite considerable. I think he is about 25 years older than me. So I did well when I went to Volksblad as a child. I obviously called everyone oom. But I think Hendrik was one of the first guys who said, don't call me oom. So no, I don't call him oom when we talk to each other.
Just put it into perspective for me, Rapport, for people who watch from other places who don't necessarily know what it is from overseas, maybe what exactly is Rapport and why are we going on about Rapport being the sort of gospel of rugby?
That's a good question. So Rapport is a Sunday publication, Afrikaans publication. It was for 50 years or how long it might have been, was a Sunday newspaper. Sport was always one of the cornerstones of Rapport. And if you go back the legacy of writers. You had Bokkie Gerber there, who was sports editor. He started book Rapport. He later became editor-in-chief of Rapport, the main editor of Rapport. You had Louis de Villiers, Rudolf Lake, so many big names, the Young Borchardt, JJ Harms. So both of them are now at SA Rugby. There was a joke that SA Rugby poached them. They always poached the Rapport journalists because then they would stop breaking stories that SA Rugby didn't enjoy. So there was always this legacy of Rapport being this big, the Afrikaans word is toonaangewend, which I can't find the English word for that now.
Trend setting.
Yeah, trend setting or the agenda setting sports publication. I think for us, when we started to see the gradual decline of number of pages in not only Sunday papers, but across the board, we always tried to protect the number of sports pages that we have in Rapport. I think when I started as editor in 2022, there were times that we had 10 sports pages. The average was 8 sports pages. We never had fewer than 6 sports pages. So there was this tradition of Rapport always that it is the one place where you can still, on a Sunday, you get the paper, you have in the main body, you have your hard news, you have your gossip stories, your celeb stories, your Geelper stories, your tabloid stories. And then in the sports pages, you always try and have some news breaking elements in there, some depth, good features, mainly about rugby. I know in the older days, they were quite big on boxing. So sometimes they would even lead with boxing stories on the front page. Now, that's not the same. So now it's mainly rugby, cricket, and then a bit of everything else. But rugby was always synonymous with Rapport. You'll see now people still saying it's a Rapport. It's a rugby paper, basically, which it's not completely true or fair. But we do pride ourselves on our rugby coverage.
Tinus, growing up, the paper was a big thing. My father would come from the train station. His suit was still cold when he walked in, and he had Die Burger and he had Cape Argus. And I love to consume both of them sort of in tandem, working from the back first. The sports pages were all that mattered. And I wanted to see what they wrote about. And there was a tradition then of, you knew exactly when it was the journalist writing and you knew when it was the opinion guy writing. And there was you actually knew that this guy was just spouting opinions and this guy was talking about what happened in the game. And we call it the paper still because it was a paper thing. You rolled it out. It was almost a ceremony. Those days are gone. We know all that's gone. But it looks like to me that the ones that survive, L'Equipe in France, Telegraph in London, they still devote a lot of pages to sport. It seems like sport's the last bastion or something of people wanting to actually read a fulsome account of the sporting weekend. It seems like you've done that you've been able to somehow, escape the judgment of the accountants or something. How did you do it? And is it true? You almost have to be really good at the whole sports thing and not try to be everything to all people.
Yeah, that last thing that you said is a very good point because, sometimes it doesn't happen regularly, but sometimes people would say, where is the coverage of, Tour de France or whatever? And my viewpoint is that I believe we are very good at rugby and cricket, specifically breaking stories. I also believe that is very important to our audience. You can go now with the internet, you can Google Tour de France and something will pop up that's much better than what we would be able to. We would probably use a story from the wires. So for me, it's getting that unique stories that you can't find anywhere else. That's for me is the biggest selling point of the Rapport Sports package, if I can put it that way. And we've also sort of moved a bit away from strong opinions in the sense that for me, so there was a famous editor, Afrikaans editor, who said, opinions are cheap. Everyone has an opinion. It's the news that sells. And for me, that's one of the mottos that I believe in. Obviously, there is space for a opinion piece, but then we would very strongly market it as such, as this guy, that this is this guy's opinion. Obviously, when you write, I do not like the word match reports, the traditional blow by blow, because everyone has seen the game, or you've watched the highlights by the time that you read the report copy. So for us, it's about going deeper. It's about writing well. That's why we brought back also now Louis de Villiers to do think pieces of bog games, which I'm very excited about. It's because he has that ability to analyze and in beautiful Afrikaans tell a story about the game. So obviously in stories like that, there is a bit of opinion. But for us, and that also ties into your bigger point, how to stay relevant, is to give people what they don't need, what they don't know, to tell people something that they don't know, and that's news. So we are very strong news driven. And in the past few years, obviously now since January, we are no longer a print product. And when you had a print product, so for me as the sports editor, I would know, well, sometimes I'd only know the Friday exactly how many pages I'll have, but you sort of have an idea it's going to be either 6 pages or 8 pages. And then you'd sort of know, how to structure the paper. What goes where, what do you want, where do you want the big splash? Now, in the post-paper time that we are in now, it's a very unique and interesting challenge, because there is no real perimeter set as to how many stories you can publish, how many pictures and graphics can you add into a story. And there's also what I really miss about the paper is in a paper you have certain pages which you can package like stories with the same theme together. Like, for example, a few weeks ago we had quite a few interviews with a few books, and I thought, all I was thinking that week was, I wish I had a double spread, because then you can put all these stories on this double spread, and the impact of that is just enormous. So now we have to find unique ways, and I think we are slowly but surely getting there in finding those unique ways. We are starting to build graphics with sub-headlines on the graphics, pictures that we add together, unique thumbnails, Rapport almost themed thumbnails, if I can put it that way. But like you said, people still want to read their sport. And I mean, every weekend when there's a bog game, the book Rapport is the most read story on the entire, not just Rapport, but on Netwerk 24, on the entire website. It's book Rapport because people want to read that. I don't really know if I answered your question well now, but that's a few thoughts on that.
No, you did. And it's actually interesting about orientating someone. My daughter's sort of going into college now, and her friends, and they struggle because they're always just looking at things in a vacuum. And so I was trying to help them understand sort of this course they were doing. And I just took to a whiteboard and I started doing this big picture. And I went, oh, now I see. I think that's what you're talking about, is you open the pages and you could see what the main thing was. Yeah. And then you had all these, peripheral stories. But now every periphery story is the same as every big story, is the same as every other thing. And it's just where you click into your rabbit hole. Yeah. But I do think you're spot on about how fans, real partisans, fanatics, there's almost never enough. Which is why MV and I exist. They want to really tunnel in on something. The line-out nerd wants everything about line-outs. And that's the hole you can fill, because there's no way TV can do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's very important. Like just on your previous point on the packaging, and it comes down to curation. When you had a paper, there was a certain curation. You had a page lead, you had a back page lead, which is your lead story. Then you had your second and sometimes third and even fourth stories on the back page, which give that story's prominence. And then you had your plugs, which shows you other important stories on the inside. And then you had your page leads and your photo lead, if it was not the same as the page lead. So, and then you had those peripheral stories that you're mentioning now. So now, when we used to publish sports-wise about 28 stories a week, now we try and do 15 stories. But for me, the bar is now that each story that we publish has to be strong enough to be a traditional page lead in the paper. And I think we also sort of get that right. On that other note, the point that you made is very important, and we also try to do those more in-depth stories. There was, when we still had a paper, we had player columns. I remember once I tried to do a story on the Springboks tries from first phase play, which was a bit more in-depth. So that's so important, and especially when after a game, you need, what you get is people, they know what they saw, so they almost have these ideas formed in their mind, and they want those ideas confirmed. That's the one thing. And the other thing is you need to surprise them, and that you can do by either with the way you write, which not everyone can do because not everyone is a brilliant writer. The turns of phrase you use, like a Louis de Villiers, Bokkie Gerber was also very good at that. I think Marizon Kop also very good at that. And then secondly, you can surprise them by, even if it's a story about the match, giving them some information that they didn't know. I think Hendrik, all that you can either do that by folding in quotes from the coach or whoever, folding in even quotes from some ex-player with very interesting views. And then thirdly, if there's something that you saw that you can sort of analyze, and you can zoom in on that. People don't want to read in the second minute, Kurtley Arendse scored in the corner, and then they converted and the score was 7-0 after 2 minutes. And then in the 5th minute, the Barbarians struck back with a try, because they know that. They saw that already. But if you can tell them, this is how that try happened. The line out, when they usually throw at a number 2 ball, they threw a number 4 ball, and they had a dummy runner. Did you see that? Cheslin was stationed in the outside channel next to, or whatever. You know, so those are some of the ways that you can really add value to your reader's experience. And to get the balance between those 3 factors, especially when it comes to reporting on matches, that's very important.
You've also now started your own Rapport Praat Sport podcast with Hendrik and Johan Tremal, and both of you referred to earlier. And that's your sort of foray into this kind of thing that Harry and I are doing, like Harry just referred to. How's that going?
Yeah, it's fun. It's obviously not at the level that you guys are. We are not professionals in the podcast game. So it's very, and we also try and not have that distract or detract from our main business, which is sports news. So we do it. I keep it very simple. It's just a telephone interview with either only those 2 guys, or we get a guest in sometimes, and then we just talk about a few things for half an hour. But it's fun, and I think people are enjoying it. But yeah, it's definitely a step into the digital era, to sort of just get that extra string to our bow, but it should never sort of take away from our main business, which is written, reported sports news.
To be able to break stories, you need to have relationships with either players or unions, whatever. Harry and I had a bit of a run-in with Jake in December. I'm going to call his name. And it was a bit of a stressful time, because you have to be so careful to manage that relationship and not step on toes, but still be true to what you do. You know, you can't just sort of whitewash everything else. That kind of a balance. Talk to me about that.
I think respect is key. But and this is a cliche, but you need a thick skin. I remember from myself now, because I'm more like a cricket writer. So I broke the story about Kagiso Rabada using cocaine, and I had to reach out to the guy, and obviously he didn't like that. And I had a good relationship with him. I mean, we were on. I was on two World Cups, the 2 last World Cups with them, and you know, I know him, and it's uncomfortable, but you have to do it. it does help to sort of almost put on a different personality, because your professional personality and your personal private personality, you should almost have that ability to split the two. But in any case, with the KG story, what happened there was when he came back, they had to do or he did a press conference. But then he said he's only going to do the press conference if myself and a journalist from News 24 was not invited. So, some things like that do happen. And it is also important because, like, for a guy like Hendrik with the Jake White story, him and Jake, they go back to 2004 when Jake was the Springbok coach. So they know each other very well. They have a very good and cordial relationship. But then you also sometimes need to be a bit brave in the sense that you know what your job is, and you need to write those stories. I think it also comes down to respect. If you report it respectfully and you approach these people respectfully, I think that mostly they will be angry at you, but at some stage they will get over it. I can't think of someone. Okay, I can't think of a few guys who don't want to talk to Rapport at all. But I mean that's okay. I mean we can live with that. It's no, it doesn't bother us. But we just try and be as fair as possible. And also another thing that's very important is also to always try and not make it personal. And I think we sort of get that right. We also try and sort of stay away from, and I know sports people are very, they say they have thick skins, but many of them don't, and they think that people criticize them. For me, you don't really necessarily need to say someone played like horrible or whatever. Another one of my favorite mottos is speak softly and carry a big stick. So there are ways to sort of convey your message without being or without seeming overly critical, because I don't believe people will say what they want to say. So just sort of to keep that balance of trying to be respectful but also doing your job. The tricky part is where it does come in and where it does get very difficult. Is obviously everyone has their sources who are, to various degrees important to you being able to do your job. And then when one of those sources, when you have to report on them, that does get extremely difficult. And the best thing to do there is almost just play open cards with them. But it's also, it's almost humanly impossible to not sort of just be a bit, like, do I really have to do this? I really don't want to burn this source. So it's that I think that's one of the most difficult parts of the job.
Tinus, I've always been curious about this, and you're like a proper guy, proper editor in a proper paper, and I'm an improper contributor to this world because I came in without any dependency. I don't have to do this. I'm doing it because I love it. I get sources, and in my mind, because I'm trying to analogize it to what I do in my real life, investigation, cross-border interrogations, we own the source. Like if one of my juniors meets someone, I don't want to know that guy. I want the junior, that's your desk. You manage the asset. You got to do what you got to do. It might be a bit embarrassing sometimes what you have to do, but make sure you own it. Then you bring it. But then I know, like, in law enforcement, they kind of have to share criminal informants and they have to register them and they have to be real and they check them out. Otherwise, you might run a story that's based on nothing. How do you balance that? I mean, do you have to sort of say, Hendrik, give me a little more flavor about who this guy is? I want to know who the oak is who's making me put a big headline there. Or does he get to own his own sources?
That is a very, very good question. And that's also another tricky thing because you need to trust your reporters. But one thing, like I have a few unwritten rules, and one thing is if it's an unnamed source, you're looking for at least 3 unnamed sources that can say, and first-hand unnamed sources that can say the same thing that corroborates the story. If it's someone on the record, that's fine, but you also need to be very careful and just double check everything. So what I would do in a situation like that is, I mean, because I trust Hendrik completely, and I know the type of journal he is, when he has a story and it's something quite explosive. We would talk about it, but I wouldn't necessarily ask him for the details of the source. He doesn't, reveal his sources ever, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. But then I'm also capable of almost double checking the information. Not that I don't trust the source, but you can never have too many sources confirming the same thing. And it's happened a few times where, my sources, they say the exact same thing and they give extra detail, because in a story with unnamed sources or off the record information, detail is so important, because the more detail that you can give, and that's what made the Bull story such a good story, is the amount of detail. Marcel Coetzee and Roan Nortje led a delegation to the CEO. I mean, you can see it in your mind's eye. Chris Rousseau and Andries Becker barely spoke to Jake White at the final. Andries Becker and Jake White had a run-in where Edgar Rathbone had to come into, had to sort out.
Fly to Munster. Yeah.
So you have those visuals, you have those details. So to get as much detail as possible, because at the end of the day, you almost need to prove to your reader that I know what I'm talking about. This, what I'm telling you, is true. And I mean, I didn't see anybody respond to the Jake story saying, "Oh no, well, maybe I saw one or two," but that was everyone just, they believed it as the complete truth, because we were able to sell them on the story. And for me, as the sports editor, I also need to be sold on the story. If I see it in front of me and I think, this sounds very sketchy, let me either cut it, or let me either try and see if myself or one of the journos, if we can get further sourcing for the story. And that's so important, because if you are incorrect one time, I mean, that it not only haunts you, but it also it just makes a bit of a difference in the mind of your reader as to how much they can trust stories that you write following that one. So that's quite important.
Talk to me about that Jake White story, because you raised it now. I'm very keen, because as you know, I'm very close to the Bulls. I live quite close to Loftus for a reason, so I can see it and everything else. And I was shocked when you gave me a bit of heads up. I was literally shocked. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't expect what happened, actually. I thought it was going to be a different story, transformation story. How did it come about? Can you give us any more details? I'm very interested to see, what the story behind the story was there.
Let me think. So basically what happened was that it wasn't something that came about overnight. It was a situation, and that's how a lot of stories get born. It's you hear something from someone, and then you ask around a bit, and you hear some more, and you hear some more. So it was a process of about 2 months where we were working on the story. Well, Hendrik was working on the story, and then it was just a case of finding the right time to press the story and then to press the go button. And I think with that story, I actually had very little. I knew very little of the amount of detail that Hendrik had until I saw it on paper. I knew, obviously, he told me that this is what he's going to do this week, or one of the things that he's going to do this week, and I knew it's going to be a big story. But I was quite curious to see, exactly what it was, because he would give me like 1 or 2 words, like just a teaser. I think Hendrik, he's a Ojakkels, so he likes to tease a bit. And then when I saw the story on the screen for the first time, yes, I mean, sometimes you get a story and you just see it and you read it and you're just like, this is going to blow up. This is so good. This is fantastic. And that's exactly the way that it went with that story. So it was a process of a few months, gathering information and everything. So no, it was a good story. And I think we also we played the ball and didn't play the man, and I think we're quite proud of that. Jake would probably disagree, but I think if we only reported the news, there was no opinion involved or anything like that. We just reported the news, and it was an important story for rugby fans in South Africa, for Bulls fans in particular. So now I'm quite proud of the way that story panned out.
But Tinus, you can admit now that MV is your source. He was deep throat, and he was actually he's playing clever right now. And so, I didn't know about it.
No,
obviously,
no, I'm going to just excuse me while I go jump off a cliff somewhere.
To me, the story evoked sort of a cultural exchange in that a lot of people were not saying it was false. They instinctively, the ring of truth was all over it. They could feel it. I could see Jake doing that. I can see the players doing that. I can see Marcel doing it. The divide seemed to be, if this works, then players can get coaches fired. This was what I think people were going like, oh, I don't like this. This is the new breed. These millennials, they're soft, they're crazy, they need too much pats on the back. Jake's old school. It should stick that. And so to me, and there was another divide saying, this is how it's going to be. You have to learn how to theme and message and convince 25-year-old guys to go and do things that are really hard, criminal in the street. I want you to run into a wall. It's not the same as it had to be. And so you just, move with the times. Is that how it kind of played out for you in your response from the articles?
No, it's quite interesting. I think we have a very unique readership, and they are divided right down the middle. They either love Jake or they hate Jake. They can't stand him or they just love him. So I think the reaction was, to my mind, it was a lot based on people's personal preference. That confirmation bias. Oh, no, Jake is terrible. Jake the snake, all the things. And I'm not surprised at all. And other people, lost for Jake 8, leave him alone. He's done wonders with the Bulls, very angry. But I do get your point as well. It is and that's one of the things that I love in stories. It's when it's almost, it transcends just the facts of the story. It gets its own theme and its own, talking points off it, and I think that definitely coaching has changed and players do get more of a voice. But I do also think that, and now you're going to ask me for an example, so I'm going to think quickly, but I do think that players, it wouldn't be the first time that players got coaches fired where the coach have if he lost the dressing room, then you lost the team. And one thing that Hendrik also said a lot of times already is, he thinks if it were only the players, and whenever Hendrik says he thinks, then it's not just he that thinks that, it's there's more to it. If it were only the players who were unhappy with Jake, then maybe you could have survived it. But the problem came in where it was also the assistant coaches, also the CEO, the relationship with Edgar Rathbone that wasn't as good as it was before. So I think that is a major part of that issue. And I think also going forward, it's interesting to hear someone like Rassie saying that he tries not to get too emotionally attached to players. He tries to have a healthy distance between himself and the players. But then when you see him interacting with the players, it's a fantastic, it's almost like a father-son sort of relationship. So I think he struck that balance exceptionally well, where he stands up for his players. He speaks honestly about the things that his players do wrong on the field. And I think they understand that because of the way that he conducts himself around them and in the media, and the trust that he's gotten from them. So it is interesting to see the new sort of generation, and with all the focus on mental health, which is fantastic. You're not going to get coaches anymore that can scream and shout and curse at players, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So it's more those softer skills that's going to come to the fore more and more, and going to become much more important in the way rugby coaches conduct themselves on the way forward.
Yeah, now I'm thinking right now, like literally at this moment, I'm thinking back on all the things that outspoken, incorrigible, rebel rogue Rassie has ever said. And I cannot think of one time in which he questioned any of his players, manhood, desire to play, fire. It was always like an actual specific thing, We're going to work on this kick chase. We're going to, I put him in a position maybe he wasn't ready for. And I think maybe this is what you're talking about, is that the crossing the Rubicon for Jake was when he gets up and says, kind of like, we were never really going to win. Their guys are just too good. And everything I've heard, my sourcing has been that really rubbed the guys wrong.
I mean, can you imagine in every week, in every press conference, your coach is speaking about his desire to get other players in? I mean, that has to chip and chip and chip and chip at you. Until then, when you lose the final, your coach says that we can't compete with a team with so many internationals. Meanwhile, how many internationals does he have? So when your coach is the entire time saying that if we need Malcolm Marx to come back, then we will be able. How much Johan Grobler feel? It's just like, I think that's the one thing where if you look at Rassie, it's that showing versus telling thing. He shows the players that he backs them because he selects the players. If you look what he did for black players, the amount of responsibility that he put on Bongi. Do you remember the last year before Rassie came in? Bongi used to play 3 minutes off the bench here, 2 minutes off the bench there. Rassie came in, so he's starting Bongi. Same with Lucanio Am. He sent, I think Jesse Creel was in that team that went to Wales or played Wales in Washington. And for the England series, Lucanio Am started at 13. He gave these players responsibilities. He showed them that he's trusting them. He's not going to cast them aside. And I think that if you do that, if you show the players that I back you, I've selected you, I'm going to play you, you can make a mistake, but we're going to work on it. If you show players that, then it doesn't really matter that much what you say, in front of the cameras or whatever, because the player already knows, he feels backed, and he knows that Rassie is in any case not going to go out and say, I wish I had a different player.
Talk to me about what's happening at the moment. We're all in tenterhooks here because Friday is the big meeting, I suppose, but I can't see things being postponed till Friday. It's the day before the test. Surely things must have happened behind the scenes at the Bulls. What's your latest? Give us a scoop.
Yeah, I mean, Hendrik's said it since last week, and he is 100% convinced that Jake is gone. So now it's just a matter of who's going to replace him. So the front runners obviously are Johan Ackerman, Franco Smit, and Johan van Graan. It does sound like there could be a few issues maybe with Johan van Graan, him having signed an extension at Bath, which would mean that the Bulls would have to pay him out of his contract there, which could be a bit expensive. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. And I think also with all the new players going to the Bulls, this could almost be a sort of turning point for them to get a new voice in. And no one can ever detract from what Jake White has done at the Bulls. I mean, he turned struggling Union around. But now not maybe, definitely we are going to see a new voice at Loftus. It's also another thing that I'm interested in is if the new coach will bring in his own assistant coaches or if he's going to keep Andries Becker and Chris Rousseau. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the answer that would be. That probably would obviously depend on who the new coach will be. But it's definitely going to be interesting.
Lots of rumors about Johan Ackerman maybe taking over, but now there's a couple of hiccups with he being offered an extension on his SA Rugby contract. We spoke to Franco Smit just last week. He's definitely interested, I would think. And what's your news? Who do you think is the favorite? Is this going to be a knee-jerk thing? You need to get a new coach in, or are they going to take their time and do a proper assessment and make the right choice? What's Hendrik hearing and you hearing?
I think a lot might be revealed on Sunday in Rapport, the way I understand.
Nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah, I don't know. On the Johan Ackerman thing, so what happened was he was obviously a consultant with the junior box for 6 months, and then his contract got extended for a month, and then there was another offer to extend it even further. For me, and this is just my opinion, I couldn't see if he really wanted the Bulls job and the Bulls really wanted him there, that contract with SA Rugby to be a consultant at the junior box really stand in the way of him coaching the Bulls. So that's the one thing. Yeah, and then, I mean, Franco, obviously, he played for the Bulls as well. Brilliant coach. He's proven track record wherever he went. So that's going to be interesting. I also know that Franco, I'm unsure. I didn't listen to your pod. I don't know if you spoke about it, but it does sound like he's a bit frustrated with some things at Glasgow. Yeah. So one of the things, obviously, that Franco is frustrated about at Glasgow is that his players, the value of his players are going up, but his budget is not really reflecting, what he has in his squad. And also something about the Scottish qualified players. I'm unsure exactly what the details is of that. So there are a few frustrating things for him at Glasgow. So I think let's see what happens.
It's interesting when coaches have to make these decisions, because it's also a family matter for them and their wife, their kids, what stage they are. But it strikes me when you talk to coaches kind of off the record, like MV is saying, is also it's quite attractive to come into a team that's not doing too well and be the agent of the turnaround. And it's sort of tricky to come into a team that keeps reaching finals, even having a home final. And then what if it goes a downturn, which it might, you have a downturn because of whatever, injuries, some other team gets better, and then you finish 5th or 6th, and we brought this Franco guy in, he beat us with Glasgow, but now he's on our side and we went worse. And so, that's tricky as well, because imagine following Rassie. I mean, imagine being the person who follows someone who did well. Yeah. I think it's interesting because, like you say, not only hiring a head coach, it's who the head coach will bring in around them. That's going to be one of the biggest dictators of success.
Yeah, definitely. But also the idea that I get, and obviously I think both of you are much more clued up about the Bulls than I am, and obviously Hendrik and all those guys. But the idea I get is that it's not necessarily a difficult fix. It's just treat the players with a bit more respect and honesty, and show them that you back them. So it's almost like a thing more about away from the playing field than on the playing field. I know that, and Hendrik always says that he believes that the Bulls were tactically outplayed in all 3 finals, which is then obviously something that you can work on. But obviously any coach that you're going to bring in will have his own tactical and technical ideas. So it's going to be more, you almost need someone to come in and almost bring a culture shift, not necessarily an entire shift, because I do think from the outside it does look like Jake has done a lot of things that's bolstered the culture at the Bulls, but then obviously something went awry. So you need someone to bring in and fix that. Very interesting, yesterday on Rapport Sport, we spoke to Rohan Smith, the former prop, and he said that because it was Jake White who gave him an opportunity at the Brumbies, and he spoke with the utmost respect. He said he loves Jake. He says Jake was the guy who gave him an opportunity. The culture that Jake created at the Brumbies was fantastic. That's why they reached the final that year, even though they had 19 players in their squad that year played their first Super Rugby game. And then it's also interesting because I asked him about the Lions, and I didn't expect it, but he said it's time for a new voice. You can't have people making weak decisions. You need to have someone like Johan Ackerman at the Lions who can say, this is the way. The words he used was you need someone that can put the hammer down, basically, and make up your own mind. So it does sound like there's a few issues with the coaching staff there, well, with Cash van Rooyen maybe there not making his own decisions. So it's interesting you have these two extremes. Jake almost trying to do everything on his own, Van Rooyen almost trying to do too little on his own. So yeah, that's also interesting dynamic. You maybe want someone in the middle, and then probably someone with a strong personality like a Franco or a Johan Ackerman. That's probably one of the reasons that the Bulls are looking at them.
But definitely going to be looking at Rapport. You've made your pitch. We'll buy a copy, or at least I'm subscribed so I can read it. Something else you referred to just earlier, a bit earlier, was your use of sources and corroborating a story with more than one source, typically 3. We ran a story on Evan Roos's father, being too involved, and Harry was quite proud of the fact that he quoted 9 sources. And last week I sat in front of Rassie, and I thought Rassie was really, I don't know if he recognized me, I was a bit nervous. You guys ran a story countering us there, saying that it's actually not the case. You picked up something else there. You also had the courtesy of giving me a bit of a heads up there, and you embedded our video, which I thank you for profusely right now. But talk to me about that specific story, the Evan Roos story, and maybe you can pitch in here. How can we be so have these different points of view, and we basically have our own sources?
The thing with that story was we had Dobson on the record, where he basically said that the reasons they got had nothing to do with Irfan's dad or his personality, but it's just a rugby decision. But I don't think the idea of the story was to disprove what you guys had said. And it can also be that 2 things are true. It could be, and I do believe, Harry had 9 sources. 9 sources is, that's, take that to the bank. 9 sources saying that there's an issue. I do believe, and I've also, I've heard similar stories. So it can be that there are issues with his, I don't want to say personality, I don't want to be mean about it, but off-field reasons. But it could also be that even though that's true, he wasn't selected, he wasn't in the squad because of rugby reasons, which, sort of rings true now that he has been called up after an injury to, who was injured, Cameron Arnicle, my favorite player. So I think both things can be true. And I think that was one of the instances where you have on the record quote from a coach saying the reasons we got, then you almost, I don't want to say obliged, but then it's almost like an official word. And then you go with that official word.
I think the conversation is important. And I think many sides, first of all, I think humans have a lot of motivations. Like when you go buy a car, you have 6 reasons. Some of them, 3 are unstated and 3 are stated. You want to look sexy. You want to be safe. You want to make a good deal. You want a lot of headspace because you're a big guy. Whatever. You have different. Who's to say what percentage is what? There's certainly friction in my sourcing between the Roos family and Rassie, and one and other they sometimes go loggerheads. We've seen that play out sometimes even between Bakkies and Eben. It doesn't mean that they can't be friends and that they're not both in the same camp in the end. And obviously, to me, Evan Roos was not the 5th best 8th man in South African rugby on a gain line carrier. There was something else. Just Rassie says character matters, picking the right person. And I was never sourcing anything about Irfan particularly, but also the family. And I think for a young man to control their dad is very difficult, by the way. And so it's no skin off his back. The reason why I went to 9 is because I felt like I had to. My responsibility was on a inflammatory story. I better get it right. And even if my first 3 were solid, let me get another 3. I've even had situations. I overheard a conversation in London between guys in RFU about bringing Checker in because they were thinking Borthwick didn't have it. I literally heard it with my own ears, which is a pretty good source. But I had to get other sources. And in the end, we didn't run the story in the Roar in Australia because it just felt there were too many other people saying officially, no, we have no interest in Checker. No, sorry. And we couldn't square it. I felt the whole conversation was interesting because it's a little bit related to the Jake story in that younger players and different dynamics and what used to be, you couldn't have questioned Doc Craven, what he was thinking. But now there's just people are always going to have different opinions. And one thing is for sure, Hanekom, Roos, this is that's a conversation right there that you're going to sell a lot of tickets.
Definitely. And I do wonder the role that the popularity of school sports and school rugby is having and how big schools rugby has become. What sort of rollover role that plays when a young player, a rugby prodigy at school level or a very good player at school, because obviously at a school level, the dads are much more involved because they are still responsible for the child. So they play an active official role. And then I do sometimes think the lines get a bit blurred when after school, because now you get an agent coming to sit with your boy and you're there with him and, you're excited and you back your car and you drive him to Durban because he's going to play for the Sharks, and you get him, you help him pay his rent at the Sharks Academy, wherever. And then sometimes I think it's a human thing that you don't realize that, maybe subconsciously you do, but it's your child, it's your boy. You love your boy and you're so proud of him and you want to make sure that the best happens for him. But now you're in a professional environment. You should go away and, be a supporter. So I do think the popularity and how professional school sports has become, that can maybe have a spillover effect on players like that. But on F1 versus Cameron, that's fantastic. And you do want rivalries like that. I'm a big Cameron Hanekom fan. I think he is probably, with Sasha, the two most important players for South Africa going forward. So I can't wait for him to be back on the field. I'm just sad that he's injured so regularly.
Mm. Now, we talked about that. We did a series with Andre Pretorius, Harry and I, where we analysed each position starting from 15 down to 1. And the one thing we mentioned about Cameron Hanekom, we called it his durability. And we rated that out of 10. We had different weightings and that is the one thing that kept popping up. And that, to us, brought him below Evan Roos. I mean, that guy is an absolute athlete. But Harry's been adamant that he needs to pick up a few kilograms and, maybe somehow become a bit less injury prone. Harry, what is that you said about him?
Yeah, so basically, I think a heavy carrier, which a lot of teams use an 8-4. They even hold the 8 back to field kicks and then run into brick walls. So you can imagine the quintessential, Dwayne Vermeulen, Kieran Reid, Hardinikoy, the other big French guy, Pickamoles. They're just big guys. They're just big bears. And, Jasper Wiese, like you could just run into a train and be okay. And Cameron, to me, is a bit of a tweener. He's an in-between guy between 6 and 8 sometimes. Plays like a link man, almost like old school Rob Lowe, tearaway flank. And then at the same time, he's been asked to carry 15 times like CJ Standard. And that's what Joe Schmidt said, is there's a very few weird psychopathic guys that can carry the ball 15 times week after week after week, because it's thankless. A lot of those times you're running into a tank. So I wonder about that. He's so good over the ball. He's so good at, tearing away from set pieces, that it might be in his future to be more on the 6 side, but fantastic talent. I just wonder as well, sort of like what you were talking about is, we get attached to, even if you're a pundit, if you're a, dispassionate, objective guy, you have favorites, and I think that's what makes sport kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, and that's also why I love writing for Rapport, because obviously our readers, when the box play, obviously when there's a provincial game, but we don't really cover the matches necessarily. When the box play, you don't need to be objective. You can, you can put on your green and gold cap and you can write, because that's also that was one of the big joys of the paper, when the Boks win the World Cup and you buy a Rapport and there's a massive splash on the front page. And with a great headline, and you just feel good. It's just like that patriotism thing. So yeah, that's also fun.
I wanted to ask you about, Rapport, on a global scale. Harry, like I said, is friends with Charlie Morgan from the Telegraph and Murray Kinsella from I'm not sure what publication he's with, but those are sort of your well-known journalists and like. So how do you rate Rapport against those? Do you sort of benchmark yourself against them, or not really?
So that's a very good question. It's difficult because obviously we have our own target audience, and us being in Afrikaans, I think what I can from what I can see is that, and that also sort of makes me proud, is that how many stories of Rapport gets followed up or mentioned globally. I mean, almost on a weekly basis, we get stories, or not on a weekly basis, but quite regularly, more than once a month. We have a story that's referenced in websites and in papers all over the world, in New Zealand, in Australia, in England. And I think the one thing that I can say, especially in England, is that the competition there is very big, for the top stories to get those scoops. But I mean, from a South African point of view, I do think, and also the one thing that I will add is that a lot of people speak about the sources that we use, but I said it the other day to our team. I don't necessarily even think that is our biggest strength. I think our biggest strength is to be able to look at, well, obviously you have your sources, and that you need for the top breaking stories, the scoops, but you can also get a scoop, and I think that's where we come in, and that's something I'm very proud of. You can also, just by thinking about a story a bit differently. So I'll give you an example. On the Cornel Hendricks, when Cornel Hendricks died, the first thing I thought was, when last did he play? And he passed away early in the week. So there was a lot of time for anyone to think the same thing that I did. And I was wondering, when did he pass away? Or when last did he play for Boland? And I went to see, and I saw that it was 7 weeks ago. And I phoned Boland and I asked, why didn't he play? And they told me that his heart condition had worsened so much that they told him to quit playing rugby. And I mean, suddenly I was thinking, and that story also did very, very well, because it was a question, what happened in the last few months of this guy's passing? And it's just that ability, and this is not me blowing my own horn or Rapport, it's just something that we try and do. And when I pull that through, I think you see a bit of that in the English press as well, where one story that I do remember where that was quite evident was one of the stories on Eddie Jones's assistant coaches. See, a question pops into your mind. Why is there so much change in the team surrounding Eddie Jones? And then you just ask the question, so you know what question to ask. And then they got that fantastic story. Was that the story of one of the assistant coaches that told the story of Eddie giving him a steak to go and take home, and then when he got it home, it wasn't a steak, it was like sausage or something, and he said, if you start to do well, you can get your meat or something like that.
Yeah, you're not ready. Yeah,
you remember that, and that's just really born out of just being curious and asking the correct questions. So I think that's one of the lessons that I take from those guys, from especially the British and the Irish press, that we also try and do at Rapport.
Rugby's a funny sport because you have these hotbeds. There's something brewing and has been brewing in Ireland. So you want to know what they're thinking and what's happening. I've gone to schools games there at Donnybrook to see St. Michael's against Blackrock, because it's really the advent of a lot of the backline moves. There's something incredibly compelling about South African sport and stories, the actual history. And I found that people who really love rugby in the French hotbeds, in the Irish, they want to know what's happening. And then you have, some townships, basically the greater London area and some of the other places where you have, deeply ingrained rugby. And so we read from guys like Charlie Morgan, but they all want to know about South African theory, doctrine, winds of change, innovation, because the innovations are not happening in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch anymore. That used to be the case. Now they're going along with the flow, and it's South Africa that's pushing the envelope. So it's interesting to me, the idea of globalizing it. MV and I have been surprised how many subscribers and followers and listeners we pick up from Cork City, Ireland. And they just want to know how South Africans see Irish rugby and vice, and go through it. So to me, there's an interesting thing happening here where, places that have traditionally been, Ireland wasn't really the hotbed of rugby. And sometimes people didn't want to know about South African thought. They can do what they want to do. Now there seems to be a lot easier to connect across cultures.
Yeah.
Where do you see, this going, though? We all looking down the road and saying, there's going to be a day when it's not all the golden era And there's no way that the Springboks can stay at this peak forever and ever and ever. Is it just ride the wave, or do you kind of think, oh, we have to develop something for the inevitable dip?
Yeah, I'll answer that now. But just on your previous point, last year when Ireland were here, I remember Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, also one of my favorite sports journals. He was here, and I can't remember if he wrote it in a piece. Yes, he did. So he was there, and that's one of the beauties of sports journalism is when you travel with a team, or when you travel to a place, you need to tell your readers what you see. You need to take them with you. And he did it so well because they were at Loftus. I was in Joburg, so I was quite close there, but he pulled me into Loftus. He was saying, he was standing there, and the Irish team was exiting their bus. They were walking into the stadium, and there was an Afrikaans dad with a young boy on his shoulders. And Rory obviously couldn't understand everything, but you could hear him telling his little boy all the names, Josh van der Vleer and Bundi Aki and Jack Crowley, and then Rory said, when previous times he was here, and so you were here in South Africa with tours, the South African people didn't know the players, so that also shows you that curiosity, and that I remember that. I mean, it's now a year later, and that shows in the first place what an excellent piece of journalism it was, and in the second place, just the curiosity about other rugby teams. And I think that's also a product of the almost globalization and social media, because rugby Twitter, obviously, you have South African fans who are just insane because they just love the Boks so much, and everything just make them about the Boks. But there is also a very nice sort of community on Twitter where people just talk about rugby and about each other's teams, and I also enjoy that. The second part of your question, where do we go from here? I do think that the way that Rassie has done this, bringing in new players the entire time, you almost don't recognize. It's almost like losing weight. You don't see while it's happening. He's brought in so many young players. Damian Willemse is not old. He's 27 years old. He's brought in a guy like Grant Williams, Sasha, obviously, Mani, who's still also not old. So he is already starting to build this new generation as he goes along. And if you look at it and you think about it, the box scrum is such a weapon. But now all of a sudden, Kitsy's gone. Okay, he was a legend of the game. But you have Ox, so you almost don't miss him. You have Gerard Steenekamp. They are now blooding Jan Hendrik vessels. And people don't even realize, but Trevor Nyakane is not even in the picture anymore. And you almost tend to forget about that. Frans Malherbe is not there. They were the number 3 and number 18 for so long, And now all of a sudden you have Volkulo, who's in the picture. You have Thomas Toy waiting in the wings, who's just, raring to go. He's such a good player. So slowly but surely, he is building that plan of the succession plan of the next guys coming in. Elrich Lau last year against the All Blacks, he brought in Ruan Orkia. So almost the puzzle, it's almost going to be a situation where you don't realize it's just going to continue. That's really what I believe. It's just going to continue. Obviously, not every year is going to be brilliant. Obviously, they're not going to win the World Cup every year. But I just can't see South African rugby going back to 7th in the world.
There's also talent bases that he's bringing in that other coaches and other personalities might not have, because he's always been a bit of a rebel and a rogue. So Vincent Chituka and guys like him, I showed a picture, a clip of Vincent to some Australian guys and Kiwi guys, and like, what a unit, what a beast. Yeah. Is he a lock? I go, not really. He's a flank. And so the idea of expanding talent bases in Eastern Province, even in Sub-Saharan Africa where people immigrate in, just like New Zealand has been doing for ages in the islands, it expands the base. And who's to say that you couldn't have Olympic level speed on the field, powerlifting, strongest man in the world, talent base connecting, which is to me always been That's always been that's heaven. Is you can get Olympic level speed, Olympic lifting level strength, and then all the trickery in between, and the DNA and the history and the heritage spread to townships and communities, and even groups that were not into rugby, and put that on the field and make beautiful music together. So I am excited. I still think it takes a maestro. I think the orchestra conductor is super important.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, like you said earlier, you don't want to follow Rassie, because you can't really follow Rassie. That's just it's not going to be the same. But the thing is also that he's built this coaching team around him with Stick, with Dion Davids, Don Heeman, obviously now Felix, Tony Brown, Jerry Flannery. Probably they won't be there forever, but that the ideas and the culture is so ingrained in all these people. And then obviously Jock Nienaber can come back. So he's expanded because he has such a big coaching staff. The ideas is there, and I think that can be carried on. And like you say, he doesn't have a profile. I need a big, tall, strong winger. He selects a player on what he used the word. He hasn't used it in a while, but he speaks about a player's party trick. I don't know if you remember that. That every player has something that makes him unique. And if you think about it, Manie Libbok is not really the typical South African fly-off profile. Rassie said, I love him, bring him here. And even though when he misses tough kicks against Argentina, he still selects him against who did he select him after that? The next game against Argentina and then against England. So he keeps backing these players, keeps building their confidence, keeps building his depth. And so now he's in a situation where he can select almost any sort of team for any sort of game plan, which I think is brilliant.
I want to ask you something else, just going back to Rapport quickly. You're talking about social media and this, network of people being built up. There's a growing trend about websites copying and pasting articles that appears in your newspaper or anyone else. Is that a sort of a bane of your existence, or is it something that we have to contend with in this day and age?
Yeah, I think when it's you can't really stop it from happening. What can't happen is obviously plagiarism, where someone just copies and pastes your entire story. But when I do see something like that, there's normally a credit in, or even 2 credits in, and it's not the entire story that's just copied and pasted, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It is quite difficult because we are a paywalled site, so you don't really want your stories to be out there. But I must say, whenever we see almost like too much of the information is getting circulated for free, then we do try and just alert whoever does it. But it doesn't really happen often. And whenever people do reference our stories, they do tend to credit more than once, give a hyperlink back to our stories, and they don't copy and paste the entire thing, which I do appreciate.
Just one last thing, plagiarism. You have a lot of people, WhatsApp groups, sending PDFs of your articles and stuff around. I want to make sure, I want to bring the point across here, because you often get this. That's illegal, isn't it? You guys have taken steps to combat that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it has happened. There was a court case. I'm not completely up to date about it, but yeah, that's one thing that I can't stomach, is when people send PDFs of papers or whatever, when especially books, and they give that away for free. So yeah, no, that's plagiarism and that's illegal, and you can go to jail for that. So do not do that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get that point across. Yeah, sorry, Harry.
What the Telegraph does, which is interesting, if you're a full subscriber, which I am, I subscribe to that one, and then the Irish Times, MBA, that's where Murray Kinsella will write. You can gift an article certain number of times per month, and obviously that gift itself, there's no money exchange, but it ends up creating new subscriptions because people end up liking it and they go, oh, I love that. Now I want to see what Charlie writes next time. Yeah, and exactly. I think there's a way to sort of use that sort of hunger without being illegal. So if people can take a look at that, and there are ways to do this without actually stealing someone's stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I do think that it's incredible to see the New York Times also has that, where you can give someone an article. It's incredible to see the organizations, the ways that people come up with sort of trying to go into the digital era and make it sustainable. And I do think that there's going to be a few hiccups still along the way, but it is important. The one interesting thing is, because obviously we have the stats, and the one thing that I am just 100% convinced of is that nothing beats news. The stories that we write and publish that gets the most acquisitions of people joining and signing up to Rapport and FR24, they are the stories where you have a unique selling point, which is breaking strong news. And that's just, that's something that I think we are very good at, and what we just want to, keep doing.
Tinus, we took up a lot of your time, and this is a very insightful conversation and a wide-ranging one at that. So thank you for that, and I appreciate the time, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Emir. Thanks, Harry. It was fun talking to you.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.